going on, y'all? It's Attorney Gerald Griggs, a justice fighter, and we are here testing out new equipment, new backdrops, new. Sorry about that, y'all. What's going on, everybody? It's Attorney Gerald Griggs, a justice fighter, and yes, you have read the headline correctly. And wow, I never thought I'd see a headline quite like this, but that's the time frame that we're in right now. It appears as though there's an opening for a return to a far gone era. So I wanted to bring in a good friend of mine, somebody who I've been in the streets with, fighting with all these years, to just have this conversation. So Dante, you really kind of go without any introduction, but you can say hello to the people.
What's up, everybody? And I think it's important for us to have these conversations. You look across the internet and you see conservative outlets trying to justify this stuff and having conversations about meritocracy and all these things, which on its face value aren't factually supported. And so I just think it's we're in a time where we got to have other voices at the table. And so I appreciate you, President Griggs, having this conversation because we got to dig deep. And one of the things that I'm hoping that you'll dive into is what the law that Lyndon B. Johnson actually signed and passed and what Trump is actually doing now and really add a context. Because we know we got folks who are upset. We're seeing the protests just around the nation. But I think what's needed is context because at the end of the day, if we're doing all this, but we're not getting people to the polls, you got to ask yourself, what service have we really provided?
Absolutely. And so, for those that have just joined us, we're about to have a conversation about an article that was published by NPR, and it's on the screen. Segregated facilities are no longer explicitly banned in federal contracts. You heard it correctly. Segregated facilities are no longer explicitly banned in federal contracts. And so, this was from NPR. Selena Simmons Duffin wrote this particular article. As you can see, it says colored waiting room only by police order. And it talks about after the recent changes by the Trump administration, the federal government no longer explicitly prohibits contractors from having segregated restrooms, waiting rooms, and drinking fountains. Yes, you heard that correctly. The segregation clause is one of several identified in a public memo issued by the General Service Administration last month, affecting all civil federal agencies. The memo explains that it is making changes prompted by Trump's executive order on diversity, equity, and inclusion, which repealed the executive order signed by Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1965 regarding federal contractors and non-discrimination. The memo also addressed Trump's executive order on gender identity. What there's still here at stake, state and federal laws outlaw segregation and discrimination. Again, they still outlaw in state law and federal law segregation and discrimination that companies will still need to comply with. But as Melissa Murray stated, who's a constitutional law professor from New York University, it's symbolic, but it's incredibly meaningful in its symbolism. So these provisions that have been omitted now require that federal contractors adhere to and comply with federal civil rights laws and to maintain integrated rather than segregated workplaces that were all part of the federal government's effort to facilitate the settlement that led to integration in the 1950s and the 1960s. And so we're going to go back to the memo that kind of outlined this, and it's in the article. And so here is the memo. It's a memorandum to civilian agencies from William Clark, the director of government-wide acquisition and policy. And it talks about Executive Order 1417.3, ending illegal discrimination, restoring merit-based opportunity, which revoked the Executive Order 1124.6, which was equal employment opportunity, and several provisions promulgated under the executive order, one of which was the ban on segregated facilities. And so it goes further. It says, of course, contractors are still covered by existing United States law and civil rights non-discrimination. These laws, whether or not the company is a government contractor. The Department of Labor sent a message stating on January the 21st, 2025, the White House and President Trump issued an executive order ending illegal discrimination and restoring merit-based opportunity. It revoked the executive order by Lyndon Baines Johnson, which is 1124.6. For 90 days from the date of this order, federal contractors may continue to comply with regulatory scheme in effect on January 20, 2025, and you may read the full message here. This executive order addresses defending women from gender identity extremism, restoring biological truth to the government, and by removing the term gender identity. This letter is issued in my capacity as as the chair of the Civilian Agency Acquisition Council, to serve as custodian, consultation in accordance with Federal Rule 1.404, authorizing agencies to issue class deviations to ensure compliance. And goes into the compliance of the order. But this was sent across the interagency, and I want to shift back to the actual article. And so, again, while there's several federal laws and state laws that outlaw segregation and discrimination, one of which would be the Civil Rights Acts, it's going to delete this. So the deletion of mention of drinking fountains, transportation, and the clausing is Federal Acquisition Regulation, known as FAR, a huge document used by agencies to write contracts for anyone providing goods and services to the federal government. In Clause 52, 222-21 of the FAR is titled Prohibition of Segregated Facilities, and reads, a contractor agrees that it does not and will not maintain and provide for its employees any segregated facilities at any of its establishments, and that it does not or will not permit its employees to perform their services at a location under its control where segregated facilities are maintained. It defines segregated facilities as work areas, restaurants, drinking fountains, transportation, housing, and more. And it says you cannot segregate based on race, color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or national origin. Several federal agencies, including the Department of Defense, Commerce, Homeland Security, have notified staff who oversee the contract that they should start instituting these changes. The notice goes into effect. A recent notice, the National Institute of Health shows that the change is already taking effect. The notice regarding a maintenance and agreement for scientific freeze dryers, citing the GSA memo, and reads FAR, the prohibition on segregated facilities, equal opportunity will not be considered when making award decisions or enforcement requirements. To be clear, all businesses, those that have government contracts and those that do not, still need to follow state and federal laws, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which makes it illegal to segregate facilities. But they have deleted this particular clause and other clauses which give us a clue of how the DEI implementation is occurring around the federal government. Dante, I mean, we just read a majority of that. And my question is, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, we would think in 2025, we wouldn't be removing clauses that effectively allow for segregated facilities by government contractors.
It's interesting. The first thing I was looking over there is they were talking about, defining discrimination, and we're saying race and color. And I'm over here, what's the difference as we
Yeah.
between race and color? But I'm gonna leave that alone. But I mean, what I hope people understand is the day and time that we're in, is what I really hope people understand, right? We had a large number of people who, for whatever reason, didn't vote. We can argue about why they didn't vote. We can get into the weeds with that, or we can look at how do we organize around this, because you and I both know that this is going to set precedent for the municipalities. We know that segregation was dealt with through the hands of the municipalities. And so if we're really talking about who values us and how we're valued within the community, the stage for that is being set right now. And so we got to be open and honest again about the time period that we are in, the expectations that we have, because as you and I's good friend, Mr. Kevin Miles said, we're in the wilderness right now. How long we stay in that wilderness is going to be on us. And I don't plan on staying out in the wilderness long. I can look at the Bible, read the Bible, and see I'm not trying to do this for 40 years, right? So how do we get to the point of organizing and helping the people who aren't as politically engaged and involved, but are voters, prepared for this fight that lies ahead, starting in this November of 2025, then in 2026, then in 2027, 2028, and reminding folks that there is no time off when it comes to voting.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think that the main thing that people need to understand is it starts with small things like this. When we first saw this particular executive order, we didn't know how it was going to be implemented. Of course, there were lawsuits that were filed to stop it. Now a judge has allowed some of the changes to go into effect. And so we're seeing a slow rollout of the ban on diversity, equity, and inclusion. But we're seeing the consequences of this. This is just not the first time. We saw that they erased the study of the Tuskegee Airmen in the Air Force Academy, and then of course they had to put that back. We're seeing the deletion of individuals in the Department of Defense, namely Medgar Evers and his service was
Yeah.
removed from a special designation on the website, and now they're talking about they're removing the notice of African American and women in Arlington National Cemetery. These are things that are happening in real time, and we may see the headlines and just kind of, you know, brush right by them. But we need to take this very seriously because, again, we're talking about the history of this country, and I know there are people in this country who don't want to talk about the history of this country. They label it critical race theory, or they label it race baiting or things like that. But then when you see stuff like this, you see why the people are raising their voices, that there's a real issue that's happening in our country because of the hijacking of the word diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we are going to bring on our platforms a real robust conversation of what those three terms actually mean, and then what policy is driving this conversation that seems to be going in a direction that is counter to the progress that we've seen over the last 60 years.
And I think just piggybacking off of the point that you made, I think it's imperative, right, that we drill down on the point that this is not the first time that this has happened, right? This has happened before, and one of the most notable times where, as a young person, I saw it is when during Black History Month we took a field trip. I was living in Washington D.C. at the time, and we went to all of the Black Civil War locations, and I remember they took us to this large field, right? Um, with no names on any of the graves. Everybody in the community knew that this was a burial ground for the Black Civil War veterans, but there was no plaque, no memorial, no honor, no anything. And so when we talk about Medgar Evers being removed, again, there are fields out there in this country where folks know, oh, we know so and so's great grandparent is buried here, yada yada. They could tell you they've had the test done, but there's still no recognition of the service of those individuals as well. And so we start having this conversation about what this looks like. Like, yeah, we are going to see it on the military side first because they want to send a message about what our military looks like, what the world is going to see when they see our military. They want to send that message first, but it's going to expand. And we know that it's already made its way into our education books. And so we've got to be clear as a unit about where we stand. And in this moment, this is when the folks who say they're allies, the folks who say they ride with us, the folks who say that they are down, this is the moment where y'all need to be speaking up too. We don't need to be the only ones shouting on these issues because we may be the loudest because we're the most impacted. And I am going to say most because, again, even in this DEI conversation, the folks at the bottom are Black folks. And I'm not saying cut anybody else out of this, but what I am and what I want to make clear is that we've carried the burden of this for a very long time, an extremely long time. And so if you say you ride with us, now's the time for you to show it.
Absolutely. And just for the people who don't know, this is the article from the Miami Herald that covered the attempted erasure of the Tuskegee Airmen from the video that was taught to, in basic training at the Air Force. And it says it took a major outcry, but the Air Force rescinded its removal of the Tuskegee Airmen video from the class. And so when we're having this conversation, it's based in fact.
Yeah.
On this platform, we're not going to push misinformation or disinformation. We're going to bring the facts as is widely reported throughout the internet and in mainstream media that's trustworthy. And so when we talk about what potentially could be happening with the resegregation of things, even though we still have concrete codified law and constitutional decisions, Supreme Court decisions that have outlawed this. This is how it starts. It starts very small. It starts very innocuous. It starts in a way that it seems, well, maybe they didn't mean it that way, or, oh, we might be a little confused. Well, if we were so confused, why did it take a major outcry to get the Tuskegee Airmen put back in, I like that, but put back in the course that was taught to young airmen who were learning in the Air Force Academy. And I think another thing that happened earlier today that needs to go stated, and I'm gonna pull it up on the screen because there's a lot of misinformation that's happening. And we saw today a historical statement made by Chief Justice Roberts, and I mean, it's not often that a sitting Supreme Court justice has to come out and issue a statement. And I know some people who watch this, don't listen to CNN, so we're gonna go to the Hill so you can see it from the Hill. Justice Roberts issued rare public pushback after Trump calls for judges' impeachment. And so Chief Justice Roberts, again, that's the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, issued a rare public statement Tuesday pushing back after President Trump called to impeach a federal judge that ruled against his administration in a high-profile deportation case. It says, for more than 2 centuries, this is Chief Justice Roberts speaking, for more than 2 centuries, it has been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement concerning a judicial decision. The normal appellate review process exists for that purpose, Roberts said. The Chief Justice's statement came hours after Trump called for the impeachment of United States District Judge James Boasberg, an appointee of President Obama, who blocked Trump from invoking the Alien Enemies Act of 1898 to swiftly deport Venezuelan migrants the administration had labeled, and we're not going to repeat what he labeled them, because again, we don't repeat stuff that hasn't been proven in a court of law. So you can't just label somebody something and try to do something to them. And so for the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court to issue a state, again, I want y'all to take this all in. Judges typically don't speak outside of their opinions, meaning a judicial opinion, which is a ruling, or maybe in a setting where they're talking about judicial philosophy or things like that. They don't usually issue rulings outside of a ruling. But this is, as far as I've ever seen, a sitting Supreme Court justice say to a president of the United States. And let's be clear. I know a lot of people running around these platforms, talking about what they think the law says and what they may interpret the law. Listen, I don't care what you think. This man is one of those individuals that makes and interprets law.
Yeah.
Marbury versus Madison gave the Supreme Court, through the Constitution, through their Article 3 powers, the power to determine what is constitutional. So it doesn't matter what the executive says. It doesn't matter what the legislative branch says. We learned in basic civics that there are 3 co-equal branches. And when 2 of the co-equal branches are not acting appropriately, it's this third co-equal branch that gets the final say. And so when you have the Chief Justice of the third co-equal branch saying that if you disagree with the federal court, and let's be clear, there's a lot of conversation on this internet talking about we don't have to listen to judges. Oh, yes, you do. Yes, you do. Because you can be held in contempt. And if you violate a judicial order, you will be held in contempt. And you will find out just as quickly as any other person that's gone into a courtroom how quickly what that judge issues from the bench is acted on. And so I think that, as we're having this conversation about the stripping away of civil rights and the replaying of history, we need to have it under this context that the president only has so much power. And when one of the co-equal branches says you're going too far, and issues a statement like this, we need to take it seriously. So, I wanted to bring that into this conversation, but we're going to shift back to the resegregation of America. And,
Hey, real quick,
go
before
ahead.
we shift back, can you pull up the Constitution for us? Because we had this conversation about civics, and what I'm learning is, they done taken so much of civics out of schools, and so a lot of people really don't know what their rights are. And you've been such a great vessel of information for me in terms of understanding what my rights are within this country as an American citizen. And so I don't know where you want to start, but this first long sentence that they wrote,
Mm-hmm.
I think sums the whole thing up perfect
Yeah.
when we're talking about the forming of a more perfect union.
And so, there's a lot of conversation about this document, and what this document says, what it doesn't say. But sometimes we just need to read the document.
Hmm.
And it says in the first, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 words, it says, "We the people of the United States." Now, notice it didn't say, "We the king," or "We the government," or "We anything else." It said, "We the people of the United States." In order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Now, that's a lot of words,
Hmm.
but ultimately it comes down to a few. One is form a more perfect union.
Hmm.
2 is establish justice.
Hmm.
3, ensure domestic tranquility. 4, provide for the common defense. 5, promote the general welfare. And 6, secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity.
Mm.
Do
And what's
what?
what's the posterity?
Establish.
A lot of people act like they don't know what that P word means.
Well, you define it for me, brother. I know what I think it means. What do you think it means? Do
We
we need
talking
to?
about we talking about the generations to come. We talking
Yes.
about our kids. We talking about Deuce. We're talking about Kylie. We're talking about Elise. We
Yeah.
talking about all the babies running around here. So again, to your point, G, I don't care what anybody's opinion about the law is. I want to know what the law says and look at how the law is applied. Because all this he say, she say, and you brought up this point. When you go in the court, there's he say, she say, and then there's what?
What the law says. Yeah. And so some of us, including the current resident of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, swore to
Mm.
protect and defend this document.
Mm-hmm.
So when we having this conversation about what powers the Congress has, the president has, the Supreme Court has, it's outlined in this document, and it's for those 6 purposes. And so let's go a little bit further, because I was watching on social media a whole conversation about Article 2 powers. So
Mm.
here's Article 1. That's the article that establishes the Congress, both the House of Representatives and the Senate. But if we go a little further down, it gives you the duties and powers of Congress.
Mm-hmm.
But if we go a little further down, it gives you, and again, it's a long document. So, let's go to Article 2. Article 2 outlines the powers of the executive branch.
Mm.
And it says the executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States, who shall hold his office for a term of 4 years, and together with the vice president chosen for the same term as elected as follows. And then it talks about the manner upon which the electors, and I know a lot of people have issues with the electoral college, but it outlines the electoral college. And then it talks about more about the removal clause of in case of removal. And then it talks about his powers. Section 2, the president shall be commander in chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and militia of the several states, and shall have the power and consent to make treaties, and he shall have the power to fill vacancies during recess of the Senate, and he shall from time to time give Congress information of the State of the Union. We all watch the State of the Union address. He shall recommend their consideration such measures that he shall judge necessary and expedient, and he may and on extraordinary occasions convene both houses or either of them in the case of disagreement with respect to the time of adjournment. It goes in, and then it talks about the president, vice president, other civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment of or conviction of the crime of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Those are the powers of the president. You just went through those, right?
Yep.
Powers of the president. And then we have the Article 3. And this is the interesting part about this whole conversation about what powers the court has. It says the judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain or establish. Judges of both the Supreme and inferior courts shall hold their offices during good behavior and shall at times receive for their services compensation which shall not be diminished during their continuance in office. And it goes further to give more of their powers. The judicial power shall extend to all cases. Well, hold on. Back up now. The judicial power shall extend to all cases. Right there, y'all. In law and equity arising under what Constitution? This Constitution. And the laws of the United States, and treaties made and of which shall be made under the authority to all cases affecting ambassadors and public ministers and consuls, and to all cases of admiralty and maritime jurisdiction, and to controversies to which the United States shall be a party.
To what?
So wait, back up. It says to controversies between the states or which the United States shall be a party. So wait a minute. So if, say, a citizen or somebody seeking citizenship was here and there had to be a determination of whether or not they could be removed, I think the Constitution gives the power to the courts to make that decision. Because again, wouldn't the United States be a party to the violation of that citizen or non-citizen's rights? Because again, citizens and non-citizens have due process protections. So again, when we're having this robust conversation about what the courts can and can't do, let's switch it back to the conversation, because it's explicit right there in the document what the courts can do, but it was also explicit a little bit earlier up in the powers of the president. So when we're having this conversation, let's root it in fact. Let's root it in the document. Now we can have political debate all day long, and I'm for political debate, political discourse. That's your freedom of speech, and I think everybody should have that.
Yeah.
But when it comes to a determination of what the law is, I think it says again, the judicial power shall extend to all cases in law and equity arising under this Constitution.
And which court did it say made that determination?
It said, I'm gonna go back up to the top.
It said there was one
judicial power of the United States shall vest in one Supreme Court, and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time. Or so wait. So the Constitution creates the Supreme Court, and the Congress created the inferior courts. So at what point does a president of the United States have the authority to determine what the judicial branch does? Now, he can appoint judges who must be confirmed by the Congress. So again, this is basic separation of powers, y'all. And what I'm asking for everybody, when we see decisions like that executive order that ended DEI, that tried to end the Civil Rights Act, we need to push back on that.
Yeah.
Because last I checked, the Congress passed the Civil Rights Act, and the courts confirmed it. So a president, yes, he has executive power. He has power over the executive branch. but he does not have the power to overturn existing law. And that's exactly what, in these cases, complainants are bringing before the court where the United States is a party. And there's only one entity under Article 3 that has the power to determine judicial issues in this country.
Real quick, G, can you explain to folks what an inferior court is?
Inferior courts would be the Court of Appeals and the trial court, which is the district court. And it's also the bankruptcy court and any other court under federal law that's established by the Congress, which it says that in the second clause in that paragraph. I mean, that sentence, and that's a very long sentence. It might be a run-on, but again, that's from another time. So, I mean, when we having these conversations about segregation returning, last I checked, segregation was outlawed not only by the Congress, but was outlawed by the Supreme Court. There was a case, I think it was Brown versus the board, and there was Broader versus Gale. It was a whole line of cases. And so what we have to do is we have to be resolute in making sure that politicians who traffic in propaganda are pushed back against by the people. And that goes for any party. Because again, at the top of this document, it says we the people. And I know some people on both sides of this debate are going to say, well, you know, when this document was written, it wasn't intended for you or Dante.
What you think about that, G?
Well, what I think is, you know, that 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment says it was written for me and Dante. And so we have every right to make sure, as a great man from Georgia once said, that everything you wrote on that paper is applied. Y'all may know him. Y'all celebrated him in January. And so we need to have this conversation, you know, in facts, you know, and I get it. You know, there's a lot of loud voices on the internet, Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon and so many others that are having these robust conversations. Well, you know what? We're going to start having these conversations because it appears to me that there are certain entities in the media that don't want to push back with facts. So we got to fact check. Go ahead, Dante.
But you know what's crazy about this whole conversation, that if you actually sit down and listen to these folks, they're not answering any questions. They're not bringing any facts to the table. They're just continuing to muddy the waters. And where I hope that Americans continue to grow in is in their understanding of their rights, because that's what we're dealing with right now. Like even the folks who were frustrated with Biden and frustrated with Obama, they don't understand their rights. They don't understand how even within this conversation, they're being used as a tool to further an alternate agenda. And so we just got to be clear about what's at stake. Like you can argue meritocracy, you can argue capitalism, you can argue whatever you want to, but at the end of the day, the government's two main objectives are to protect and provide, and you could say checks and balances, right?
Absolutely.
And so when you look at what their role is to do, the government's role ain't to get caught up in capitalism, because the government ain't here. It's not here to make money, right? The government's not here. We can say we all want the best person to get the job, right? But we also want to make sure that the best person can be interviewed. Like you can't sit over here and say, oh man, there's a black pilot and I just question their credibility. No, black people have shown throughout time, throughout the history, that they've had to be twice as good, three times as good, just to get half as far. And so we just got to have a real conversation about where we are in this day and time, and what's going to be needed going forward. But that starts with understanding. And so that's why I'm really appreciative that we went through parts of this Constitution. It may be even worth us having more of these where we're actually breaking down different sections of the Constitution, because what I'm seeing, and this is the sad part about it, is folks don't know their rights. And they end up going through the Constitution like they go through a Bible, pulling out a verse here and a verse there, taking the whole thing out of context. And it's like, That's not how this thing is supposed to work. You're supposed to look at it in context. And there's a reason why this Constitution has lasted as long as it has. And there's a reason why, you're not looking at 2/3 of this nation voting to change this or change that, because it's rooted regardless of who wrote it. It's rooted in principles that we can all get behind.
Yeah, and I think it's an easy conversation when we base it in fact, and I understand that we are transitioning into a new reality where everybody's voice can be heard, and I want to hear everybody's voice. But when it comes to certain bedrock principles
Yeah.
of jurisprudence in this country, we've already had this debate.
Yeah.
you know and so when I see headlines like this, segregation may really return in certain places in the United States, and federal government no longer prohibits contractors from
Mm.
having segregated facilities. I mean, what are we really doing? I mean, how are we? Then this is the article from the Root. We already went over the letter that set this up. If you're just now joining us, you can go back to the earlier portion of the stream and this. But is Jim Crow, are we in the Jim Crow era again? Because segregation may be coming back in the United States. And it kind of goes through, it says the memo specifically read, when issuing new solicitations or contracts, do not include any of the following uh, uh, provisions or clauses. The prohibition of segregated facilities. This repeal, the segregation clause, was prompted by President Donald Trump's executive order on DEI, which also rescinded President Lyndon Baines Johnson's 1965 executive order that provided equal opportunity in federal employment for all qualified persons and to prohibit discrimination in employment on the basis of race, creed, color, national origin, according to the United States Equal Protection Opportunity Commission. And it goes on, can be found in the federal acquisition regulations, which are the set of rules the agency has to follow in contracting. So, we having this conversation in 2025 as if it's 1925. There's a real problem. And we, as the people, which we saw in our founding document, the Constitution, of course, you can go back to the Declaration of Independence and others, Federalist Papers. But when we start talking about the inclusion of millions of Americans through all of the Civil Rights Act, all of the Bill of Rights, and then of course the Civil Rights Acts, we shouldn't be having this conversation. I get it. There are certain people in this country
Yeah.
who think that maybe Brown versus the Board of Education was wrongly decided. I don't know how you get to that point, but some people think that. But how do we get to the point in 2025 where we are relitigating things as if it's 1955? That's already happened.
Yeah.
What we're trying to do is move forward, and we understand that half the country may have voted for some of this, and that's fine. But until you amend the Constitution, and it takes more than 50% of America, it takes 2/3 of the states.
Mhm.
We are operating under the current Constitution, and the current Constitution protects against this.
Yeah.
And I think that as we're having this debate, I would hope more conservatives, more Black conservatives, would have a real robust conversation about this, because it's very hard as an attorney, as a father, as a Southerner, to see stuff like this and not wonder what conversations are happening at the highest level. Because hopefully these individuals are in the room. They're having the conversation and they're pushing back and saying, this is not making America great again. This is making America racist again.
And I think, to your point, where I'd like to see this conversation expanded is, not only is racism not good for business, it's not good for humanity, it's not good for building a community. I mean, when you go back to that very first long run on sentence in the Constitution, it says, "We the people," right? And it talks about in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice. So you tell me in a room full of white men that the first thing that they were thinking about when forming a more perfect union was making sure everybody was treated fairly or the perception of them all being treated. I mean, even at that moment, they understood that without fair, equal treatment, even if it was just amongst themselves, was going to create a problem. What do you think that looks like across this nation? And so we just have to be real about what this conversation is, where this is pushing us into, because it's not just this relegation of rights that we're looking at here and who gets what and who does this and who does that. You can mask racism and meritocracy. You can mask racism in whatever you want to, but what are we doing to further this country? Because the reality is everything that they're doing is not going to push us ahead as the leader of the free world, right? These things aren't going to push us forward, right? If anything, we're losing respect from the other nations. The other nations are looking at us and they may not laugh in our face, but they are laughing at us. We have a joke as the leader of our country. And I know because I have friends in other countries. We're seeing the way Canada's treating us. They're talking about turning off their own electricity to 3 states that use Canadian electricity. It's like we're not even thinking about the impact of any of these decisions, right? We're talking about putting tariffs on, and it's like you have people that don't even understand the burden that puts on the businesses that actually support America, which is small businesses. Small businesses are the backbone of this country, not these Fortune 500 companies. And we're seeing in real time that when you have a Fortune 400, 500 company, right, who activates policies that are against the will of the people, what happens when you start to exercise those policies that discriminate? And so I think we're going to continue to see people fighting back and looking at the past and how we won. And so if this is the fight that I think these conservative Republicans are looking for, it's coming. And what I need our folks to understand is don't don't take one step back. Whatever you got to do to push this movement forward, whether it's you saying, hey, you know what, I'm not going to fund my own oppression, I'm going to stand on it. Whether it's you saying, I'm going to exercise my First Amendment rights and protest, we have to continue to work within our own individual strengths in order to make sure we can get the collective desired results that we want.
Absolutely. And I agree with that 100%. And be clear, this is a call for people to come into this movement,
Hmm.
because what I would like for our conservative brother and sister to understand is there are red lines.
Yeah.
Segregation is a red line.
Hmm.
Racism against black people is a red line.
Yeah.
And what we are asking for, not asking anymore, what we are demanding is that the work that our ancestors did will not be erased.
Hmm.
It won't be banned in a book. It won't be removed from a cemetery. It will not be erased off of any legal protections. But what we're also saying is we get it. Some of you feel like you've been left behind.
Hmm.
But in you being left behind does not mean that you get to attack others.
That's right.
There are a large amount of Americans, both black, white, Latino, Asian, gay, straight, feel like they've been left behind. But they don't try to erase everybody else's existence. And what's happening in this country right now is antithetical to the country that we want to become.
Yep.
And I think that if they believe that we're going to be silent in this moment,
Talk
they
about
are
it.
sorely mistaken. Because no matter how you try to whitewash our heroes from the past, this is exactly what they did in those times. And courage will not skip this generation. Now, what we have to do in this generation is make sure we root our conversation in fact.
Yeah.
Segregation was not good for Black people.
Mm.
Slavery was not good for Black people. Yes, we survived. We are a very resilient people, but we are not going back to that, no matter how you try to sugarcoat it. And you're not going to miseducate our children. Let's be clear, Black people have been educating themselves since they got over here. We've always known stuff like this would happen. But what I'm asking is for our allies, the ones who say they stand with us, the ones that march for Big George and Breonna and Ahmaud and all of those,
Mm-hmm.
stop being silent in this moment. For the corporations who said that they understood in 2020 systemic racism and wanted to become anti-racist, where are you now?
Yep.
This is not good for business, and I need only bring up a few organizations who found out. Thank you, Jamal, for leading the fast. And again, this is me talking as Gerald Griggs and not as the president of the state conference. I will not fund my own oppression. I would hope people that look like me and others of goodwill would feel the same way.
Mm-hmm.
But what needs to happen right now is that the adults need to come to the front of the room.
Mm-hmm.
Our children are watching. Some of us, our grandchildren are watching, and they're not happy with what they're seeing out of their parents.
Yeah.
Some of them may expect that out of their grandparents, because some of y'all's grandparents yelled at Ruby Bridges.
Mm.
Okay. Some of your grandparents lynched some folks.
Mm.
Some of your grandparents said segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. But
Mm.
y'all need to remember our grandparents said, we not doing any of that. We sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Yep.
We gonna make sure we get into some good and necessary trouble. We gonna make the Constitution mean every single word that's printed on those papers for everybody. And so that's the moment in history we are in. And the world is watching. And
You
I promise you, we're not gonna lose this fight. And so what I'm asking is we don't see any more of this right here. Segregation may really return in certain places in the United States. That's a no-go. That is a red line. We have so many other things that we could be talking about, like the price of eggs, the price of gas. Why are we going? The price of homes is going up. Why the stock market is in the toilet? Why our 401ks are diving, into areas that we haven't seen in 15 years. I thought that was the reason why millions of people voted for a change.
Yep.
If that's the case, let's focus on that, not this.
Yeah.
And so, Dante, I just want to leave the people with some hope. What is your message of hope as we see the potential return of segregation?
My message of hope is that we remember each and all of the legends that came before us, because the legends all didn't look like me and Gerald. The legends all didn't look like my wife. These legends that came in all shapes, sizes, and colors, as my granny used to tell us. They understood the power of a united front. And we have to be honest about that. There's reasons why, and it wasn't just white evangelicals. It was white people of good conscience and good faith that stepped in and got involved even in the abolition movement. Because guess what? Slavery wasn't good for America, right? Segregation wasn't good for America, which is why you didn't just see black folks outside. If this stuff worked, right? If it worked, there wouldn't have been these movements, because more people would have benefited. Nobody has ever benefited from bigotry. Nobody. Even if they like to say, well, my pockets got fat. Yeah, your pockets got fat, but what did you destroy in the process? And so as we sit back and we look at this moment, what I want y'all to do is I want you to find some books of those leaders that came before us, whether it's Frederick Douglass, whether it's Ida B. Wells, whether it's Jones from Power Mahalan, Loki Mahalan, whoever you need to read about to gather some inspiration. I need you to do that because for the next at least 4 years, this is a lifetime fight, but for at least the next 4 years, we got to be prepared to stand and not move. We got to be prepared to say publicly and powerfully, not another step back. We've already given up too much ground. Right now, my daughter, many of your children have a less rights than what we were born with. That is a problem. That is an atrocity. And so we need to look out. The hope is, right, and the next young leader, the folks we know that we need to replace some of these conservatives with, right? Putting those young leaders in a place to not only affirm our rights, but ensure that they are pushing the legislative powers forward and continuing to build on the equity. These are the things that we need to do. That is where hope is. Hope is in getting from point A to point B. As long as we see movement, the power, the strength will propel us forward because we will be driven by progress. This is something that Gerald and I have seen. Gerald, how many battles we don't lost? How
Man,
many battles we don't lost?
we ain't lost many, if not any.
Man, I mean, every time I think we losing, even when they redraw the lines, next thing I know, it's a lawsuit saying, "Hey, y'all can't do that. Fix it." Or if you do change it, here's how to make it more equitable. Like we're winning so many battles in real time. This is not a time for us to be saddened, disheartened, depressed, anxious. It's not a time for any of that. What it's a time for is to look at how we're winning right now and continue to build on it. And I will.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what I want people to understand is trauma
Mm.
exists in the absence of justice. Now, we just read that document that just literally said that we formed this country for the pursuit of justice,
Mm-hmm.
to ensure justice. Let's get some more justice.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear a lot of people talking about they're tired.
Mm.
If anybody has a right to be tired, it's me and Dante. And we ain't no ways tired. And I meant it just like that because we summon the power of our ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
Let's be clear. None of y'all would beat with billy clubs, water hoses, dogs sicked on you. None of you have been lynched.
Mm-hmm.
None of you have suffered the indignation of what our ancestors went through. So respectfully, stop saying you're tired. You just need to refocus the energy. Refocus the energy and remember what your children and your grandchildren are going to say about this particular era. And if you want them to say in the middle of 2025, when all looked bleak, when they were trying to return segregation and they were trying to erase Black veterans,
Mm-hmm.
our people stood up, people of good conscience, people that marched with John Lewis in 2020, 2019, 2018. I'm not talking about 1960s. I respect all of that, but I'm not talking about that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about what you did in 2020.
Come on.
It's time for us to show this country one more time that the grandchildren of the greats from the past are still here and we're not tired. I get it. We marched to the polls. We lost the election. That's fine. But there are other elections coming.
Mm-hmm.
In the municipal races, one thing you're going to learn about politics, all politics is local.
Yep.
And we live in a wonderful country that puts all power in the what? People.
Mm-hmm.
It also puts all power in the states
Mm-hmm.
because all power that's not expressly given to the federal government, according to the 10th Amendment to that Constitution I just read to y'all a few minutes ago, goes to the states. So regardless of what he's doing in Washington, If we keep them folks straight down there at that gold dome, which we have been doing this session, then we don't have to worry about Washington, D.C. and whatever they're doing up there.
Mm-hmm.
But what we have to do is to continue to encourage one another.
Yep.
When I get tired, you encourage me. When you get tired, I encourage you. But let's be clear, we winning, y'all.
Mm-hmm.
We have one of the most successful economic disturbances going on since Montgomery.
Mm.
I think somebody's learning that, eliminating DEI is not good for the bottom line.
That's right.
So look at the things that you can control. Recognize that some parts of the media are used to make you feel afraid,
Mm-hmm.
to make you lose the power that you already have, to
Yep.
make you feel like you've already lost the battle. But I'll be clear with you on this, and we're going to close. That it's always darkest right before the dawn. And the dawn is right on the other side of this fight. They're not expecting us to fight. We need to fight back. And I'm not talking about physical fighting. I'm talking about discipline, nonviolent resistance. Resist in whatever way you find appropriate. If you need to go outside and protest, if you need to not buy a Tesla, if you need to let somebody know that it's not okay to make Nazi signatures, Nazi salutes, maybe you need to do that.
Come on.
If you need to educate folks to say, get your hands off our Social Security, rehire our veterans,
Mm-hmm.
stop firing CDC workers, maybe you need to say that.
Yeah.
Or maybe you need to get on the phone with your elected officials, and when they have the town halls, show up at their town halls and remind them that y'all put them there. Or maybe you need to remind a certain congresswoman from the 14th district that is still Georgia, and that most Georgians don't really like the divisive rhetoric that's coming on this platform. Yes, it's streaming on X, so y'all can tag her, say I said it. And the last thing that I'm gonna leave y'all with is this. We won in the abolition movement. We won in the women's rights movement. We won in the Black liberation movement. We won in the LGBTQIA movement. We won in the social justice movement just a few years ago. And we will win in this movement. And so they can erase Black Lives Matter off of a plaza in DC. We never asked for that. We were outside marching for justice. Didn't nobody ever march outside for sidewalks and painting on sidewalks? We wanted justice for all of those stolen lives. And we still want that same justice. And I'm just crazy enough to believe that the same people that were marching outside are listening to this live stream. I need you to summon that courage that you had, that you still have, and go get 5 or 6 more people by sharing this Zoom, sharing this live stream, and reminding them that we're not going back to segregation. We're not going back to slavery. We're not going back to the loss of our rights. And we're going to send a message to Washington and the Gold Dome, not one step back. And so it's been a pleasure to have a conversation with you on this Justified podcast. I know the title got a lot of people worked up, but I wanted you to see it for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of times mainstream media, they're not going to talk about this.
Not at
They'll
all.
talk about it after something happens. But I want you to know this is happening in real time so that you can be prepared, that you know that you have the essential steps. Step 1, stop saying you're tired. Step 2, let's organize. If you are not a member of an organization that does this civil rights work, that does this social justice work, you need to join an organization and get mobilized. Step 3, we got to strategize. This is a life fight. It's not for 1 year, 2 years. This is a life fight.
Yep.
And if you're not connected with folks that do this life work, you need to get connected. And finally, yes, we do need some self-care. But what self-care looks like is winning the fight.
Talk about it.
Nobody quits in the middle of the fight because they were tired. If you're tired, you need to re-energize yourself by the stuff that you're seeing. because trust me, the people that are fighting to take you backwards are not tired.
That's
They
right.
have been planning this for 60 years, and they have a 100-year plan. And so, if we don't want to lose the hard-earned gains that our ancestors made and fought hard for us, we need to stop that tired mess.
Yeah.
And I know that to some, it may seem like tough love, but hey, I'm a dad. When my children start saying they're tired, that's not how we roll. When my friends start saying they're tired, that's not how they roll. That's not how we roll. And so, if you get connected with those steps, and then the final step is to educate somebody on what their rights really are. You are not powerless in this fight. America does not, will not, and never will have a king. And that's because of the resilience of American people. We are all patriots. So let's take the patriotic symbol of America back. And let's remind America why that Statue of Liberty stands over there on Ellis Island. Look at the bottom of the Statue of Liberty. What's on those feet? Chains.
Mm,
Statue of Liberty was meant for emancipation.
mm,
It's emancipation time.
mm.
And so, as the people that were emancipated, we ready for this fight. You're not taking us back. We're not going anywhere. We're going to make America great for the first time by reminding millions of Americans that the black and brown folks aren't going anywhere. And so I appreciate everybody that's taking this time out. I hope it was insightful. You learned something, that you learned that you can overcome this, even though we have people trying to take us back to a far gone dark era. But we've been here before, y'all. So let's make sure that we don't lose one step back. Let's act like we've been there before, and let's fight back in the way that will make our ancestors proud, but not only our ancestors, but our descendants. And so this has been another episode of the Justice Fighter podcast. You can find us on all streaming platforms. Thank you, Dante, for jumping in on this stream. And I will see y'all on the next episode of the Justice Fighter podcast.